Hello, my name is Tamia Booker and I'm a political strategist. I'm excited to talk with you today about the endorsement process and why it's so important for your campaign. A little bit of background about me. I started T Booker Strategies about a year ago, and prior to that, I served as the National Political Director for Cory Booker's 2020 presidential campaign, his Deputy Chief of Staff in his Senate office, and I've worked on a number of campaigns prior to that. I served on Secretary Hillary Clinton's campaign, I served in President Obama's administration and his campaign. My very first campaign was John Kerry's, and I was a student organizer. And so my background has always been in politics since I was a young student, and I'm very excited today to talk to you about my vast experience in politics and how this will help you as you build your campaign. So let's talk about endorsements. When you're thinking about endorsements, they're important because you really want to build momentum for your campaign and show support from voters. But who are those people? So we need to figure out who we want those endorsements from, right? And so you have to start thinking about your list of people that are going to endorse and support your campaign. So who are those people? So when we're thinking about the people that are going to be key endorsers for your campaign, you need to think about it in different aspects. One, you need to engage voters. Who are the people that are going to move your voters to support you? And you need to think about your voters in different segments. You have voters who are likely to vote for you, who are always going to vote and support you. That's your base voters of support. You have people who are swing voters who sometimes vote in elections, don't always, could possibly. And then you have a third element of people who may not necessarily vote at all, but could be influenced to vote. And so that's how you want to think about who are the people in your area, in the state, that can influence your campaign. So that leads us to who our endorsers are. So let's use an example. Let's say you're running for Congress and your member is a popular member, but they've decided to step down because they want to pass the torch and they've served in the seat for a very long time. Elected officials can be very important in this aspect. If this is a popular member that people like, you want to think about putting those elected officials on the list. In that case, if you have a governor or other electeds in the state who can be influential, you want to put them on your list first. So prioritize your list of people who could help you. That's your first list. Your second are your political and civic organizations. Those are labor unions. Those are civic groups. They're also, right now we have choice organizations that endorse, and we have other civic organizations that endorse. And I think what can be very helpful for you in this aspect is look at other candidates who've had races and look at their endorsers. And that will help you build your list of those who can support you. That's very important. Now, I mentioned earlier another aspect of people who may not necessarily always vote but could be convinced. And that's where this category can be super helpful. Your influencers and celebrities. That doesn't necessarily mean everyone on TV. An influencer can be a barbershop owner in the area that everyone loves. It can be a pastor who people find very popular. It can be a celebrity who has ties or is from the area that travels there often. So you need to build your list of endorsers, of your influencers and celebrities that you could tap into. And lastly, community leaders. I was recently on a race in Alabama, and in Birmingham, they have neighborhood leaders. And while they didn't endorse in their formal capacity, they could actually do it in their personal capacity. Who are those community leaders that you know will show up and support you? So when you look at these 4 buckets, these are the people that can endorse your campaign and help you win, right? And every single one of these buckets have people that will support you, that will lift the community and help influence everyone. So I look at this and I see that all of these people actually are influencers in their own right. They're just all in different ways, but it's important for you to prioritize this list. So you should work with your campaign manager, and if you do have a political director to make sure you prioritize this list and have people that you can work with to get the endorsement of everyone in these areas. So how do you secure these endorsements? So let's go back to the member of Congress example. So say you want to sit down with this person. Ideally, you should meet with them before you announce. Sometimes circumstances don't allow for it to do so, but if you're running for a member's seat, the courtesy is always there, and political courtesies are huge in this business. And so you should never have a meeting with a member or anyone that you're seeking an endorsement from without having an ask. And that ask should be for an endorsement. Sometimes people shy away. They don't want to think that they're meeting with someone just because you need something. But if you're taking an elected official's time and they're actually giving you their time, they're expecting you to ask something of them and that you may need something from them. So please be sure when you're meeting with them to talk about your vision, why you're running for this position, why you want to continue their legacy, and why you think you're the best person for this job. But you should also ask for their support with that. And with endorsements also come money. And this is also super important. So you should ask for their endorsement and a financial contribution. Because I always like to say campaigns can't run on smiles. They have to run on something. And they have to run on money to fuel the campaign. You need to hire staff. You need to be on TV. You need to run digital ads. All of that stuff is important to make sure you actually win. And so in order for you to do that, you need to make sure that you are asking for exactly what you need. If you do not get that endorsement in that meeting, that's okay too. Sometimes, depending on the race, you may be in a primary that's very crowded. The person may want to take some time to figure out who else is in the race. They may want to make a splash, which we'll talk about press a little bit later, and do it later on in the race. Either way, you should continue to massage the relationship. If they bring a chief of staff with them in the meeting, which more than likely they will, you should also bring your staffer. Make sure your staffer follows up with them. You should also do the same thing. Continue to engage with that potential endorser throughout the campaign and find out the timing of when they think they will be ready to make an endorsement. Sometimes they know and sometimes they don't. The most important thing to do, unless they've indicated to you that they are going to endorse someone else, is to continue to stay in touch, because you never know how things may shake up. People drop out of races, people come into races, and people change their minds. And if that happens, you want to still keep that rapport with that member or that governor or whomever that person may be. So that's for elected officials. Let's talk about political organizations. So the organizations, some that I mentioned earlier, the unions, the choice organizations like NARAL and Planned Parenthood, they all have different processes for endorsements. And so for many of the unions and other groups, you will have to participate in forums or panel discussions, town halls, or things of that nature. You may also have to fill out questionnaires. You as a candidate, you need to be very involved in that process, because all of these questions that they ask are going to inform the platform of your campaign, because a lot of these questions are very policy focused. And as we mentioned earlier, talking about your mission and your vision with your endorsers, this is the same thing. You just may not be doing it with just one person. So it's very important to remember that when you're doing this. So your staff will work on the questionnaire in that process. And in some campaigns, the candidate will do the questionnaire. I worked with a candidate who just won her primary. She did all her questionnaires herself. And what she would do is, I was her political consultant, and she would go through the answers with me to make sure everything was politically sound. You can do that as well. You want to make sure that your vision also is up to date and current with where people are, and also makes sense and really fits well with the organization. So there are different ways to secure endorsements, and with these organizations, it's all very different. And when it comes to influencers and celebrities, as we talked about before, they're all very different processes. Sometimes they reach out. Sometimes they want to get involved in your race without you having to do so. Sometimes an organization will say, oh, we have these influencers that want to be helpful to your campaign. Sometimes it comes to you. That can happen. It's rare, but you should always be prepared. And as I mentioned before, have that list ready, so when it comes your way, you're prepared for it. So what happens when you finally do get an endorsement? Yay, you scream, you're excited, you jump up and down, but that's not it. There's a whole nother world that happens once you finally secure an endorsement. It's exciting for the campaign. It helps build the momentum. You think about the likely voters that we talked about, the swing voters, the people who might be hesitant, that you may want to engage, but you're not sure how. So depending on who the endorser is, what do you do when you get them? So there's a couple of things. There's 4 different elements to this that are super important when you get an endorsement. And you have to involve everyone on your campaign in these different departments, because this is very important to the process. The first thing, as I mentioned earlier, is finance, right? You need to make sure you're raising money. Raising money is always tougher. Black women have the hardest time raising money on campaigns. It's frustrating. There are many reasons for it. So you must get comfortable with frequently asking. And when you ask for that endorsement earlier, you ask them financially for support. So they shouldn't be surprised when you ask for it again when they've committed to helping your campaign. So you should, depending on who they are, you should ask them to headline a fundraiser for you. Can they co-chair an event for you? Can they send emails on behalf of you to their lists? And so by that, I mean, if you have an elected official who has a vast email list, They frequently email. We all get emails from different elected officials asking for different things. Can you help me before my fundraising deadline? We always get that at the end of the quarter. But you can make a splash with a big announcement of someone, and they can actually send it out on your behalf to their own list, which is a new list for you, and introduce you to their list. That can be, depending on the list, that can be a great generator of money for you. You can also have them pen an email to your list. The one thing I will say, and I'll get into this a little bit later, is these are some of the things that when I was working for Senator Booker, people would ask us to do, and we would do. You just need to make sure you're actually asking. The next thing I'll mention is volunteers. So we talked earlier about unions. We talked about civic organizations. College students, I got involved as a college student. They are some of the best and most loyal volunteers. There was not very many. As long as you were in line with my values as a college student, I would show up for your campaign. And they are some of the best and most faithful volunteers. And unions do the same thing. When they have endorsed your campaign, they will send people out to help you. And so you should ask for volunteers for support, and not just at the end. We always think about the GOTV period or early vote period when it's time to vote, and that is super important. But there's a lot of momentum that needs to be built up until then. That is knocking on doors and engaging with voters throughout the cycle. That is making phone calls. That's staffing events. That's setting up your office. Those things are all very important and critical to your campaign, because you want to make sure that your community, your state, your area has seen your presence throughout the campaign cycle. And so that's super important. So having volunteers throughout your campaign that these organizations can provide to help support you really takes some of the stress off of your staff to find volunteers, when many of these organizations will have people who will volunteer for you. So I mentioned earlier about making a splash, and this is where communications really comes in. And so I mentioned the 4 elements of staff on the campaign. So we talked about the finance team, we talked about field volunteers, now we're talking about communications. And those, we have the press side and we have the digital side. So on the press side, you want to make sure that you are sending out a press release announcing that you secured this very large endorsement. And you can utilize social media, which we'll get into, to announce that. And depending on who it is, this can be a big deal. Whatever you're running for, you could get, let's say you get President Obama's endorsement. Who's not going to announce that? So you definitely need to announce that one. You want to put that in the press. So depending on who it is, and between getting someone as high level as a president, a celebrity, or the person who was in the seat prior to you, those are all big hits. And you should rely on your communications team to determine who gets a press release and who maybe will do press release and social, or just social. And all of it's important because you're trying to reach different audiences depending on who the endorser is. So for digital, again, as I mentioned, that's where most people, I think, now are getting their news. And social media is very important. And so for the influencers we talked about, that's going to be huge. You're reaching people who are not going to be on a lot of press lists, or who are not going to look at daily clips. This is important too. So all of those endorsers, a lot of us check Twitter in the morning, look at our Instagram pages. I would like to see, I look at my candidates' Instagram pages. I like to see what's happening. And because I'm personally a fan of Instagram, make sure you have a TikTok page. That's for the younger folks, but I know it's very helpful in politics and people are utilizing it more. But wherever you can make a splash, wherever you are, your region, your state, you want to make sure that you're utilizing your endorsements over social media. And the picture I showed you earlier was a picture of the vice president with now Secretary Fudge. And that was an event. She endorsed her and they had a big event to celebrate. And that's how you can utilize your endorsees. And it doesn't necessarily have to be when they're announcing. In many cases, when you get a huge endorsement, you may do it at the end of the campaign, but you can also have them host events for you and with you throughout the campaign. I mentioned this earlier, and I want to stress this again. It's important that your staff also follows up with your endorsers and continues the relationship. When we were working, I've been on both sides of this. I've been on the side of trying to secure endorsements for a candidate, and I've been on the side of being an endorser for candidates. And when we were on that side, people were able to utilize these 4 things from our campaign, from Senator Booker, who was not a candidate then, more when their staff followed up with us. So you could send your list of asks. You could ask for all things. You could ask for fundraising support. You could ask for volunteers. You could ask for event help. You could ask for digital participation all at once, or you could ask for it piecemeal. But either way, the staff that followed up with us, we were willing to help, because once we're willing to endorse you, we'll let you know what we can and can't do based on our capacity. You should always ask if they can travel and help you do an event at the end. If they can't do it throughout the cycle, but at least during the last couple of weeks before the election cycle. So events are important. They build momentum. And this is where you may get people who typically wouldn't come out, depending on who your endorser is, to come and support your campaign. So staff follow-up is critical. I stress that a lot because you want to make sure your staff is following up with their teams. So how do you keep your endorsers engaged? As we talked about, it's beyond just the staff follow-up. What you can do is you can send monthly emails updating them on the state of your race. You can do polling and briefing updates. You can also send them talking points. There are talking points from your campaign. Let's say something big happens in your area and your endorsers may want to say something about it. If it affects you or the region, you may have talking points available for them so they can utilize that your communication staff has put together. And then lastly, you may want to include some clips from the news. Let's say you go viral on something, and you can utilize that as well. So these are all very important to keep your endorsers involved, because you don't want them to necessarily forget about your campaign. You want them to keep your campaign top of mind. And when we always talk about voting, we talk about connecting with people 7 times before they vote. And with your endorsers, you want to continue to engage them throughout the campaign process, whether they endorse you in the beginning of the campaign or whether they endorse you at the end of the campaign. Either way, they want to have that relationship with you, and you want to have that relationship with them so they can continue to connect the community and you throughout the campaign cycle. And so let's bring it all together. You know, how can endorsers help your campaign? How can they help you? Continuous engagement throughout the campaign is super important. I stressed that before. I'm going to say that again and again. As you build and strategize who your best people are, you want to keep that list together and keep talking through it. And listen, this also includes potentials. Keep the potentials in your bucket. As I said before, people drop out, people drop in, things change, people change their minds. Continue to keep that list together. Keep your priorities straight, and make sure your staff is engaging with them when you cannot. Because as a candidate, you're always going to be pulled into something. But this is very important. And many endorsers want to believe and feel like you are engaged and invested in getting their support. So you will have to do a lot of legwork. So when they talk about political calls, you will need to make those sometimes. That's important. You need to make sure you're utilizing them when they decide that they're supporting you for fundraising, digital, press, and get out the vote opportunities, because that is very important, and making sure that they help build momentum for the campaign. And then lastly, you want to work with them. You want to continue to work with them once you're elected, because you want to have the relationship with them, especially if you end up working with these people, whether you're serving with them in Congress or you're going to end up working with them in the state legislature if they're a governor. And also, you probably will run again. And so when you go through this again, you want to have those relationships there, and it'll help you build and make re-election super important. So think about all of these elements when you're building your campaign and thinking about your endorsements as an aspect here. It's important. And I think the one thing too is what could be amazing that I did not mention earlier is when you're rolling out your campaign and announcing, you could also announce with some support. I think it always looks great, especially local support. So as you build your campaign, think about these elements. Make sure you're engaging people, because the people are the ones that are going to support you, help you build momentum, and make sure that you win. So thank you.